the three dots.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome. My name is Nathan. I'm joined by my colleague, Daniel.
Hello, everyone.
And today we're going to be starting a presentation on Battery 101. So this is our introductory talk on batteries. So the real basics, and we're going to get started on that. We're letting people roll in. And as we do, again, good morning or good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are around the world. This is a NABCEP certified training. So if you're looking for continuing education credits, please make sure to stay through the entire presentation. We'll display our email at the end, and you can send us an email asking to receive your certificate. And in that email, please do include how you would like your name to appear on that certificate. It should match your registration with NABCEP. So let's jump into it. There are a lot of free training opportunities that we provide. We have self-paced learning opportunities through the Briggs Stratton Power Academy. And if you go to our website, we also have many more upcoming talks similar to this one in webinar format that you can join, that you can also earn NABCEP credits for. Next week, we have a talk on our ESS, the fully integrated, vertically integrated AmpliPHI energy storage system that's about to start shipping. And so if you're interested in that, please join us next week for a webinar as well. As we get started here, we realize that as this is an introductory talk, we like to highlight kind of the background and history of AmpliPHI Power. So we've been doing LFP batteries for 13 years now. And I won't go through the entire history, but a couple of years ago, we were acquired by Briggs Stratton Energy Solutions. And just to point out that this might not sound like a long time, 13 years of doing LFP batteries and home backup, but Tesla didn't release the Powerwall until, when was that, Daniel?
It was around 2015 or so, and really, got going more in like 2016.
Yeah, and so we've been doing this for 13 years. Back in 2010 is when we got started, and we've got experience and have been deploying lots of different solutions. We have a whole variety of solutions as we're going to get into today. But now that we are part of Briggs Stratton Energy Solutions, we're offering vertically integrated packages, complete packages. You might know Briggs Stratton as a generator provider, one of the largest engine manufacturers in the world. And so we have a whole selection of vertically integrated products now through the Briggs Stratton lineup, including generators like this one. The ESS on the top is what the training next week's webinar is going to be about, how you can configure and what packages we have to offer, battery backup packages, as well as generator integration with solar and battery storage, which is a topic that's quite familiar to people that live off-grid, but people that are on-grid don't think of this quite as often. So what's driving this market? Why are you here? Why are customers coming to electricians and asking for battery backup? Why are they needing this, right? There are more and more people that are working from home. We have more people that are spending time in their houses and using their houses for their occupations, such as me. I'm one of them. I work from home. I've got an energy storage system, Briggs Stratton energy storage system behind me on my wall. And if the power goes down, I still have access to the internet. I still have access to power, right? So more and more people are fitting into that category. We also know that at least across the US, we have aging infrastructure, right? Our power lines are older, our substations are older, and there's a funding gap, right? People don't want to pay extra costs for energy, and there are regulations surrounding upgrades. And so at least in some parts of the US, we're having failing infrastructure, and that's partly related to the rise in electrification, right? We have more demands on our electric grid because more people are using more electricity, and those two factors compound to give us challenges with our electric grid. Similarly, we have climate-related disasters. We have hurricanes, we have tornadoes, we have, in our case, flooding in California. We have heat-related issues as well. We had a low temperature problem in Texas years ago in which the electric grid couldn't handle the excess load. We also have a growth of clean energy solutions and people wanting to use clean energy solutions, right? So what does this all come down to? It comes down to the fact that there is a need for backup, and there is a need for solutions for customers wanting to have access to power continuously at their homes. And one key fact that we're going to point out here to you is that only about 15% of solar owners have battery storage right now, and 61% say that they would like it, right? So there's this big demand for it. And of course, the question is, right, are there solutions that will meet their budget and meet their energy needs? So let's talk about some of the battery solutions. What things characterize our battery solutions? What are these three adjectives that we like to describe SampliPHI with? So we strive to provide safe solutions, right? We use only cobalt-free chemistry. We use a chemistry that is based on iron instead of cobalt. It's a much more stable type of chemistry that gives more life cycles, longer lasting battery, and then is ultimately very safe for the homeowner. We don't want an energy solution in our home that is not safe for the people living in that dwelling. Essentially, we have no risk of unmitigated thermal runaway with fire propagation, right? So these batteries, unlike the types of fires that you see with NMC batteries, where you have a fire that basically cannot be put out, with LFP, the fire will basically extinguish, and we show that through our UL testing. So we publish our UL test results in which a battery, so the UL 9540A, which is shown there, battery is forced by the UL testing lab into a off-gassing event, and I'll describe what that is a little bit later. And basically with our batteries and our cells, they self-extinguish, right? You don't have this self-propagating fire that will not extinguish, and is very hard to distinguish because what's inside the battery, especially with these cobalt-based batteries, is fuel, right? We have UN Department of Transportation certifications to ship and even airship some of our batteries. The next adjective I would say for SampliPHI that is a pretty good description is that we're proven, right? So we've been doing this for 13 years. We've been using LFP batteries for 13 years. We've been providing these energy solutions. We've been deployed in over 45 countries. We've got over 300 megawatt hours installed now. We have solutions that have been adopted by the US Army and Marine Corps for their energy needs across the world. And those are typically in very harsh environments, right? We also have a business model that demonstrates social impact and profitability can coexist. We make donations to nonprofits. We have batteries powering the most recent one, a new school in Fiji. We had one recently that went online in Peru earlier this year. And so we try to give back. And so if you have a great nonprofit that you would like to recommend that we have a look at and see if maybe we could provide a solution for them, please do let us know. We also offer simple solutions, right? Our solutions do not involve complicated cooling mechanisms and other things that are required by more complicated or more dangerous battery chemistries that involve cobalt. So we'll talk a little bit about those. Our systems allow people to store energy for critical backup. So if they want to keep that home online, our solutions offer that. We also maximize resilience and energy security for our customers by having that continuous access, right? A lot of people don't know, just because you have solar on your roof doesn't mean you have power when the grid goes down. If you have AC coupled solar on your roof and there's no signal for those micro inverters or that string inverter, that system will go offline. Add some batteries in as a solution, right? And you can keep that solar array producing in the event of a power outage, a grid down outage. So there are also ways to use batteries, cycling batteries, to save on your utility bills. You could generate energy during the day, use it in the evening when you need it. So we'll get into some of that. We have UL listings, and so some jurisdictions are requiring very strict UL 9540 listings. We can talk about some of those, and if you're having challenges with UL listings and inspectors, please don't hesitate to reach out and talk to one of our sales application engineers. This is something that we do fairly often. I'll say this just in passing because I want to get into the meat of the material for today, but there are a variety of applications that you can use battery backup for. One of them is peak shaving. So there are creative ways that utilities try to charge customers. One way is that demand charge, right? If you have a office or a factory or even a home that's using large amounts of energy, you can get hit with these what are called demand charges. And these are based on the rate of use of energy. So if you're using energy very quickly for very short amount of time, you can get these peaks as are illustrated on the left side of your screen. By combining battery backup and solar, you can discharge those batteries to prevent those peaks. And you could do this by adding some CTs into your systems to prevent those peaks and monitor how much power you're drawing from the grid and supplement that with a battery system. There are also time of use rates. Here, my electricity bill in California is based on, it's higher at high times of use. And in fact, I think it's 5 to 9 p.m. In my locality where I use PG&E, Pacific Coast Gas and Electric. And so in the evening times, I can pay close to 40 cents per kilowatt hour versus if I use that same amount of electricity over the nighttime, I pay a much lower rate. And so by having batteries, you can discharge those batteries when the electricity is expensive and not have to pay for energy in those peak times. You can also use, if you integrate batteries with solar, as most people do, you can also use that energy when you like. So you're generating that energy during the day, and if you're generating excess over the loads of your home, you can save that excess energy and use that over the nighttime or the early morning when solar is not available.
And Nathan, one good point about that is here in California, we recently had a change in the net metering agreements, or the rules in which the interconnection agreements matter. And historically, under a net metering 2.0, it was you could send 1 unit of electricity to the grid and get 1 credit for that to use at night or in the winter time. With this new interconnection agreement, NEM 3.0, essentially it's become that you don't see a financial return on a solar only system. In fact, you need to now pair that with an energy storage system to see a financial return, just for that exact moment, that exact concept you just explained, that we can store it during the day and use it at night. Before we move on, anybody who has questions, and you might have already mentioned this, Nathan, is please put your questions in the Q&A. It's at the bottom or the top, and get some questions going, and we'll answer them on the fly.
Thanks a lot, Daniel. I appreciate that. And that's an important commentary. I did not make the NEM 2.0. My neighbors did. And essentially our feedback tariffs to the grid have dropped by a factor of about 3. So we're getting about 25% of the feedback credit that we used to here in California. And oftentimes what happens in California propagates throughout the country. For better or worse, the utilities have decided that solar feedback onto the grid in the afternoon time, right, is not worth the higher cost that they used to have to pay. They used to have to pay what the same rate that they sold it to you at as a credit, and that's no longer the case. So let's talk a little bit about battery chemistry. There's lots of different types of lithium-ion batteries, and not everybody knows this, right? People hear lithium-ion and they think, oh, well, it's one type of battery, just like lead acid is one type of battery, just like alkaline is one type of battery. But lithium-ion refers to the ion that is used to transport charge from the cathode to the anode inside a lithium-ion battery. And there are many different types of lithium-ion batteries. Mostly they vary by what the cathode material is. That's I guess you could think of the positive side of the battery. Batteries that are based on LFP are much safer. Essentially, we have no risk of unmitigated thermal runaway and fire. So it's a much safer battery chemistry without that cobalt in there. We also don't have cobalt, so it's not a toxic element. Right, we eliminated that from our batteries. Our batteries are not landfill safe, and the reason they're not landfill safe, you should still recycle these batteries, is because they have lithium inside them. right? Lithium is a salt, and that salt is can be harmful if dissolved in water because it's soluble in water. The LFP battery chemistry also doesn't involve the mining of lithium, and the mining of lithium is typically done in Africa, often in the Congo, it involve the mining of cobalt, which is done in Africa. Mostly the Congo is known for this. And there sometimes can be challenges in doing this ethically, right? And so cobalt is one of those elements that is surrounded by a cloud of abusive mining practices. Ventilation can also be required for other battery types. It's not required for LFP, right? So you don't have this off-gassing that you have to worry about with LFP batteries. These are hermetically sealed batteries. Cooling equipment is also not required for LFP batteries. NMC batteries and batteries involving cobalt often have to have cooling equipment to keep that battery temperature down, and that involves an additional complexity that involves more equipment, more possible points of failure. Safety monitoring equipment might also be needed for other types of battery chemistry due to off-gassing and other events that can happen. It's not required for most LFP installations. There is an exception in the jurisdiction of New York City. So when you're in high-rise buildings in New York City, they do require off-gassing equipment. And if you are installing in the boroughs or in New York City, we are one of the few companies that is authorized to install batteries in the city, and we have a solution that does have monitoring equipment ready to go. So if you're installing in a jurisdiction that requires that, let us know and we can help out. The nice thing about LFP as well is it's a more stable chemistry, and it can withstand slightly higher temperatures than NMC and NCA types of batteries. So we're going to talk about these temperatures and some of the effects, but again, highlighting some of the batteries that are out there. You have lithium cobalt oxide batteries. NMC batteries are lithium nickel manganese cobalt oxide. These are very common, especially in power tools and sometimes in mobile applications like cars. My brother is currently designing ones for these. The nice thing about NMC batteries is they're lightweight, right? So they're good for applications which require lightweight things, like you can imagine drones. My brother's designing a battery pack for the next Mars rover, kind of bragging there a little bit, but this is typically in cars as well. LMO batteries are a little bit less common, but it's lithium manganese oxide batteries. And then we're showing there on the screen LFP batteries, lithium iron phosphate, where we don't have the nickel and the manganese and the cobalt. We're replacing that with an iron phosphate. Iron phosphate is a much safer chemical, right? It occurs within our DNA. And so it's something that's non-toxic. And it's also more stable, gives you more cycle life, but it is heavier, right? And so that for mobile applications, it's maybe has some less desirable properties. It's 20% heavier for the same amount of energy storage, but for a home application, this is really currently the best solution that there is. And I don't believe any other application right now for home battery backup or office battery backup should include anything other than an LFP battery. NCA batteries is a nickel, cobalt, aluminum oxide battery. And a lithium titanate battery there allows very rapid charging. It's actually a different anode. So all the other batteries use a cathode negative side, cathode anode. But this is it's not just chemistry that differentiates batteries. It's also form factor. It's how the cells are made. So there are three most common ways of making battery cells are cylindrical cells. And you've seen these before. This is typically what alkaline batteries look like. It's a steel case, a rigid steel case that includes a rolled up cathode and anode. And that's called the jelly roll. It's rolled around the steel core, and then it's hermetically sealed with a vent at the top in the case that the battery were to go into a fire. That vent will pop open, and that's what causes an off-gassing event. So I'll talk about that in a little bit.
Nathan, we had a question. Somebody is asking, can I get a comparison on sodium-ion chemistry? How does sodium-ion and how does that fit into this picture?
Yeah, so it's a good question, right? There are going to be other exchange ions that can be used. So if you go to a heavier ion. So lithium, right, is just 3 protons. It's very light. And a lithium positive charge is 3 protons, 3 neutrons, and 2 electrons, right? So that's Li plus. It's very, very lightweight. And so if that is the ion that is kind of moving through the electrolyte, you're not having to move a more massive element. That's one of the reasons why lithium has such good mobility properties and is a very efficient battery cell, right? You can deliver close to 95, 96% efficiencies round trip in some cases. I think as you go towards heavier ions, you're going to lose some of that efficiency, but it's all depending on how that battery is constructed. So I don't know a ton about using sodium. I can just say that from a physicist's point of view or a chemist's point of view, it's a heavier element, and so you probably are not going to be able to have such lightweight and such energy efficient solutions. That doesn't mean that you can't have efficient and decent energy solutions. I just think that for the time being, lithium is kind of king. So it's a great question, and we can look more into sodium, and I probably will just for fun. I like looking into these, and sodium is one. Metal batteries, I don't know if you've heard of those, but those are also fun solutions. Daniel, there was one more question. Should we answer it now?
I was going to save it. Essentially,
Okay.
because we got a slide coming up, is why does LFP not require cooling? Thermal safety, so you can let it run hotter. If you want to hold off on that, I know we got some slide coming up.
Yeah, great. Let's we'll get into that in a second. So let's talk about the other types of battery cells that are out there. So pouch cells are the cheapest way to make lithium batteries. Essentially, the jelly roll is in the form of a flattened out rectangle, and it's sealed up inside a pouch that's really a aluminum foil wrapped pouch. So it's a plastic coated with aluminum, and that's what seals in that jelly roll. Unfortunately, I mean, these are really good for low cost applications, like you might have something like this in your Bluetooth headphones. Older phones used to have this, and I'm showing you a pouch cell on the right there that I took out of an Apple iPhone that had bubbled up and burst. And so the downside to pouch cells, the upside is they're very cheap. The downside is they don't last as long. They swell and contract with temperature, and oftentimes they can bubble out as the cells off gas and kind of form that gas layer, which delaminates the pouch cells. Prismatic cells are a little better than pouch cells. They're not quite as good as cylindrical cells in many ways, but they are cheaper to manufacture. They typically come in very large formats. You get a lot more energy in a prismatic cell because it's much bigger, so it's lower cost to build. But it doesn't last quite as long as cylindrical cells due to the expansion and contraction kind of that you have with a less rigid case, right? So a pouch or a prismatic cell, they can, as they heat and cool, they expand and contract, and that movement of the cell typically results in a slightly shorter lifespan. So cylindrical cells is what we use. It's a premium cell that offers us the ability to give the longest lasting warranty on the market. And for our communicating batteries, we're having a 15-year warranty, an unlimited number of cycles. And so we're going to talk about that with our ESS talk next week. And it's our first real announcement of this is this week that we're switching to a 15-year warranty on our communicating batteries. And we're going to talk about why we're doing that. So we're using an LFP, lithium iron phosphate battery chemistry with a cylindrical cell. What happens inside the cells is that you have lithium moving through an electrolyte. And I'm mentioning this here briefly. So inside the cell, you can kind of visualize what's happening as lithium ions moving between a graphite layer and a metal oxide layer. They prefer to be in the metal oxide layer. In our case, this is actually LFP. But by charging the system up, we can pump the lithium ion over to the graphite side. And the way we do that is a charger pulls the electrons off the lithium, pumps them around an external circuit, and puts them on the graphite side. The lithium then moves over to the graphite side to meet its electrons and then resides in the graphite anode layer. So a fully charged battery has the majority of the lithium residing in the graphite layer. If we then remove the charger and replace the charger with a load, we can allow those electrons to drain back to the metal oxide side, in our case, the LFP side, and the lithium ions move their way over to the metal oxide to join them. That's the driving force. The lithium wants to be in the LFP side of the battery. The electrons cannot move through the porous separator layer. It's only allows lithium, and it does not allow the electrons to go with it. And so that's the driving force of one of these batteries. I mention this because the electrolyte solution is important. It's an organic salt solution. And so understanding what happens in the battery, you don't have to remember what I just told you about the lithium moving, but that electrolyte solution is what burns in the case of battery fires. And all lithium batteries have an electrolyte solution. It's typically the same type of thing, slightly different variations of it, depending on how that battery is intended to be used. But what can happen if a cell is damaged, imagine an accident, maybe there's an electric bicycle and a bike has an accident and something punctures a cell or dents a cell enough that the cell gets damaged. Or in the case of these phones, right, these pouch cells were shorting themselves. So if you get a battery cell that is damaged, it can be shorted, and so you can have a rapid movement of charge from the cathode to the anode. So you can imagine puncturing with a nail gun or any type of accident. And so if you have one cell that is rapidly discharging its heat, right, rapidly discharging its energy from the cathode to the anode because they're now shorted out, the electrons can just rapidly move, you end up generating heat. If that cell gets very hot, that cell can go through what's called an off-gassing event. It can give off the organic electrolyte that's inside there. You can think of something like a diesel, right? That's got ions, including lithium, dissolved in it. If it gets hot enough, that pressure builds up and that cell can off-gas. And if this cell off-gasses and that electrolyte starts to burn, that generates more heat, and you can have essentially a chain reaction. This is known as thermal runaway. It can happen if there's some short circuit failure inside a cell, possibly even due to maybe a low quality battery cell being manufactured with a defect, or as I mentioned, a nail gun puncture, or in the case of moving vehicles, some type of car crash or some type of damage, somebody bumps into the battery with their car that was installed in a garage. Our batteries essentially will self-extinguish. That propagation, if you have one cell fail, it can happen, it can off-gas, but we don't have issues in which our cells have propagation from one to the next to the next. And don't believe us. I mean, this is documented by our UL 9540A test results that we do publish the videos of those. Spoiler alert, our test results are fairly boring. There's some gas generated from the forced heating of the cell, but it does not burst into flames and propagate. Other battery types, especially NMC types, right, are much more likely to have this propagation. Now, that doesn't mean good batteries can't be made of NMC. They are. There are, especially mobile applications, there's a very good use for NMC batteries. So LFP can reach higher temperatures than NMC before a thermal runaway event begins. So we're looking at around 200 degrees Celsius for LFP versus 170 for NMC batteries. And LFP can also have a much lower maximum temperature than NMC and other cobalt-based chemistries during a thermal runaway. So what this means, it seems like contradictory to my first statement, right? But a lower maximum temperature during a thermal runaway event. So if you force a thermal runaway event with an LFP battery, the battery discharges much more slowly. So the energy comes out of the LFP cell much more slowly, which results in a lower temperature fire if you do have an event like this. So I'm going to show you a graph of this. But first, let me just point out, again, I say don't trust us alone, like look at external sources. So Do-It-Yourself Solar is a YouTube channel that releases tons and tons of reviews of inverters and batteries and test results. And Will Prowse, who runs this channel, did a test, I think it was late last year, in which he actually punctured an NMC cell, and then he punctured an LFP cell, and he filmed the two. And what happened is, as soon as he made a puncture of the NMC cell, it started off-gassing, it actually looked like the LFP cell on the right started putting off this gas, but very rapidly that gas burst into flames and that cell bubbled up and released fire. So this you can see is a very rapid release of energy, which results in a fire. With the LFP cell, he did a very similar test. He punctured it. In fact, he had to puncture this cell almost a dozen times to even get it to off gas. And when it did off gas, it slowly released the gas. And so this was a great example. I wish I could show you the video here. A great example of why LFP is just much safer for the house. You have batteries mounted on the wall, and for some reason somebody shoots a nail gun through the other side of the wall, or that's a very unlikely scenario. Or let's say a more likely scenario, the battery gets dropped, right? Somebody's trying to move the battery and the battery gets dropped. Or another more likely scenario, you don't put in parking ballards in the garage and somebody runs into the battery bank with a car. Maybe you have that teenager that's learning how to drive. In the event that an LFP battery gets damaged, you're much less likely to have a major incident compared to NMC. And I point this out because some of our competitors use NMC batteries for home battery backup. So let's look during a thermal runaway. Again, this is an independent source. These are test results that are coming from the Sandia National Lab in New Mexico. And they have a battery abuse and testing facility at Sandia National Labs. So these are scientists working for national labs in the US that are doing tests of different types of battery cells. And what you see on the vertical axis is how quickly the heat is being released. So the normalized means they account for different size cells there. So normalized, they're dividing by the kilowatt hours of the cell. And what we're looking at is how quickly the temperature is rising, right? The degrees Celsius per minute. And then they're compensating for the number of amp hours. So how quickly is that temperature going up with each minute? If you look at these are forced thermal runaway events for different chemistries. If you look at LFP, it just sits along the bottom, right? It's that much more slow of an energy release process. If you look at NMC, you get a peak, which is something like 50 times higher than the LFP. If you're looking at lithium cobalt oxide and the NCA batteries, nickel, cobalt, aluminum oxide batteries, you get these very high peaks, and that means if they go through a runaway event, they release their energy very quickly. And I used the example in talking to somebody before of, a candle slowly burning off with the wax fuel versus a can of gasoline rapidly bursting into fire. And this is kind of trying to illustrate how much safer LFP is. So if you zoom in on the curve to see LFP, you'll see that it tops out with these units at 1.5 degrees Celsius per minute. That's a very slow thermal event for LFP. You get a much slower rise in. So because LFP is a much safer chemistry, we don't need complicated cooling devices. We don't need devices such as one shown here. This is somebody's actual home-built project, but similar things are needed. Even Teslas that are using NMC batteries have cooling systems built into the batteries, right? And it's just an added complexity that can have more points of failure in the case of a battery. So with LFP batteries, the chemistry is fairly stable. They are a little heavier, but you get a lot more energy, and because of that stability, you get a lot more cycle lives. So we're talking 10,000 cycle lives, right? So if you cycled your battery once a day, that works out to over 25 years, 27 years, I think, is one cycle a day with LFP batteries. Now, I say 10,000 cycles, that's with a depth of discharge of 80%. And I'm going to come back to that and talk about the number of cycles. But for comparisons, right, you're looking at more like 3,000 cycles out of an NMC cell. And when you're looking at lead acid batteries, it's more like 1,000 to 2,000 cycles. We'll talk about levelized cost of energy towards the end of this talk. Yes, lithium batteries are more expensive than lead acid, but you get a lot more cycles out of them with a lot greater depth of discharge. One thing that is common as an issue with lithium batteries is that charging temperature. If you try to charge lithium batteries at low temperatures, below freezing, right, That's when the internal battery temperature is below freezing. You can end up with some problems, and the problems come from the fact that the lithium is slow to work its way into the anode, the graphite. And so the intercalation process, the movement of the ions between the layers of the graphite is slow. Because that's the case, if we try to charge too rapidly at low temperatures, where you can visualize at low temperatures the electrolyte more like a maybe a honey, right? If you get the honey very hot, it's not very viscous, but at very low temperatures, the electrolyte is more viscous, and you have some trouble getting that lithium into the graphite. If that's the case, you can get this buildup of lithium. And Daniel, what are those branches called? What's the word for branches when you can actually get this lithium deposits?
Dendrites.
Yeah, you get dendrites that can actually damage the battery. With time, they can grow. And the word dendrite there means literally branches. And so you can get growth of lithium on the graphite, which damages the battery with time. So you have to be careful about low temperatures. One way that we are careful, and one reason why we're going to be offering a 15-year warranty on our AmpliPHI and SimpliPHI batteries with an unlimited number of cycles, right? You can get as many cycles as you want in 15 years, is that these batteries have some temperature controls built into their BMS that, one, allows us to charge at temperatures below freezing, although slowly, right? We rapidly slow down the charging rate at low temperatures with the advanced BMS that's inside these batteries. And so by regulating that charging and regulating charging at temperatures above 40 degrees Celsius, so when we're in that 40 to 50 degree window, we can slow the battery discharge and charge rates down a little bit. We can make these batteries last an extremely long time, and as many cycles as you can get out of those batteries in 15 years, you can do with our batteries. So let's talk about life cycle of our batteries. Excuse me, I have to mute. I'm sorry, I didn't do this before the.
Nathan, one thing while we're on the topic of warranties here is that, I was reading some of our competitor warranties, and a lot of them will say a certain number of cycles, certain number of years, or a certain number of throughput, megawatt hour throughput. That means for every watt hour you put in and you take out of the battery, that counts. And a lot of those warranties is whichever comes first, whether it's the cycle first, the lifetime first, or this throughput cycle first. And so I want to be clear to everyone that we don't have the whichever comes first clause. It's simply 10 years. And soon to be changed, upgraded, unlimited cycles, and unlimited throughput. So I just want to make sure everyone's clear on that on this call. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great point, Daniel. And again, I apologize for the interruption there. Daniel, our warranty is just plain and simple, right? It's 10 years on our products, and it's about to expand to 15 years on our communicating batteries. And we don't have those limits that Daniel talked about. So when you do get your warranties, if you are looking at our competitors, ask them, what does that include? Does it limit the number of cycles? Does it limit my depth of discharge? In our case, we don't limit any of those things. We recommend our customers use an 80% depth of discharge. And the reason for this is if you use an 80% depth of discharge, we expect 10,000 cycles out of your battery. So battery is kind of like a car. If you take good care of it, if you change the oil, if you don't drive it on rough roads and jump it and do all sorts of crazy things, if you don't let that teenager drive it, you can expect 20 plus years out of a car, right? If you abuse it, you're going to get less. And the same thing with a battery, right? If you discharge a battery, so abuse for a battery is operating in extreme temperatures, right? Really cold temperatures, really hot temperatures. It's also if you're constantly draining that battery to zero. You drain that battery to zero 100 times, even 500 times, it's probably going to have very little impact on the battery. But if you do that 1,000 times, or in the case of doing it every single time, we're only expecting about 3,000 cycles out of that battery if you drain it to zero every time. So the end of the discharge cycle for a battery is kind of the worst part for the battery. The other thing for a battery on the charging side is letting it sit at high voltages for a long time. So be sure to follow our recommendations on those voltages. We recommend if you're floating the battery to float it at 54 volts. And when you're charging the battery, don't exceed 56 volts. We use a 56 volts on our 48-volt batteries. So what protections are built into batteries? So all batteries have what's called, all lithium batteries need what's called a BMS. And the BMS is there to balance the cells, and in our case, to provide overcurrent protection, charge and discharge protection, so we don't discharge too quickly, and short circuit protection. Our AmpliPHI batteries have even more protection that's built into those advanced BMS systems that's there, that does temperature compensation. It monitors the rate and communicates out to appropriate charging equipment what rate the battery wants to be charged and discharged. It also can communicate with other equipment and give you visibility into what's happening inside the battery. One thing I do want to point out is all of our batteries have a breaker built into them. In the case of the Phi battery, it's an 80 amp breaker. And that's nice for being able to install the battery with the battery switched off. It also allows you to isolate the battery when you're doing testing and other battery related functions. The Phi batteries have some key features. One of them is the fact that they're coming in these 3.8 kilowatt hour building blocks. So you can change the size of your battery bank. You can add batteries to the bank if your energy needs grow. So one thing that people often find is if they install solar, they install batteries, they start converting more and more of their home appliances to electric appliances. And so energy needs can change with time. Families can grow, energy use can grow, especially electricity use can grow. And so we have the scalability here with that Phi battery. You can expand it, and you can offer very small solutions or very large solutions with this single battery. Here's a nice example. What are we seeing on the left there, Daniel?
That is an airport hangar on one of the islands in Hawaii. And what we're seeing are 80 batteries that have all been paralleled up using some of those nice custom bus bars. So the idea that you can scale the system to meet the size system that you need.
So Daniel, this is a huge amount of energy, 300 kilowatt hours. That the copper color that you're seeing there are bus bars to maintain balance on those batteries as we're drawing that current off. 300 kilowatt hours, right? A microwave is typically using something like 1 kilowatt, right? And so you could run a single microwave off this thing for 300 hours straight, right? It's 2 weeks. So it's a very large solution, but at the same time, we can look at smaller solutions. On the right, you see that there's a 8 battery solution there. That would power my house. My house has 3 of these batteries and can easily power my house for a 24-hour period or longer, depending on your energy needs. And the only reason for mine, it can only power for 24 hours is I have a hot tub, which consumes a decent amount of energy. Daniel, on the right there, on the bottom, what have they done?
So what they did is they came back out to a system. You can see that SMA, probably a sunny island there, that has added 8 additional batteries. So we've doubled the size of the battery bank. And I always like this because we can sit down with the homeowners and maybe they don't have the budget or the needs for such a large system, and always explain that we can come back and expand the system later. And it's a great way to maintain the relationship with the homeowner as you're going down the future.
So that's great, Daniel. What's in the middle there in the screen? What is that?
That is a combiner. So what that is bringing all of those batteries together in a single point so that we're maintaining equal resistance between all the batteries. So we don't get one battery working harder than the others.
Yes, it's important to use equal length cables when you're discharging and charging your batteries. When you're doing that install, if you use equal length cables, they all maintain a balance. If some of the batteries have shorter cables and others have longer cables, you can create problems with one battery closest to the power draw closest to that sunny island doing more work than the others. And so what they've done here is utilized a combiner, cabling of equal length to keep these batteries balanced in the install. Other features of our Phi batteries is they're self-contained and they have stable LFP chemistry, right? We talked about the fact that they do not vent or release any gases. These are sealed batteries. And they also don't need any work. There's no maintenance to be done because they are sealed. right? You can't come in and water them like you would have to with lead acid batteries. They also have a very low self-discharge rate. Those of us who are familiar with lead acid batteries, just because of our cars and other things, we'd be very surprised if we left our car for a month and we came back and that battery was nearly fully charged. Well, the case of self-discharge for one of our 5 batteries, we're looking at 1% over a month period, right? So if you charge that battery up to 100%, you came back a month later, you find it at 99% at the end of that month, right? So there's very low self-discharge rates, and they're also extremely efficient. And part of the reason for that is that lithium-ion that I mentioned, but also just a good quality construction with premium battery cells inside. Here's what it looks like to upgrade a lead acid battery bank, right? If you look at that battery bank on the left, there looks to be at least 16 lead acid batteries that are there. We're upgrading it to, and those batteries, Daniel, what type of maintenance would be required on a lead acid battery bank like that?
So we would want to water the batteries and make sure that we keep the electrolyte filled up, potentially a specific gravity test. We would want to clean some of those terminals as well. And so it could be maintenance. And one of the things I've always seen is a lot of homeowners choose not to subscribe to any of your service plans or maintenance packages, which ultimately the homeowner forgets to water the batteries, and they end up with a damaged battery bank, and you're coming out to have to replace that lead acid. So in a lot of ways, being maintenance free can save some of the homeowners a lot of money. Just a time check for us, Nathan. We're about 15 minutes left as we're heading out, and I got a couple questions. I'm gonna condense them here, and we'll answer questions here in a minute.
Okay, great. Well, I appreciate that, Daniel. And yeah, so the old lead acid battery banks, our lithium batteries are often being used to replace old lead acid battery banks. That sulfuric acid that's used as the electrolyte in those banks, right? You have to continuously add water because you can lose some water, as Daniel was mentioning, and then that acid, of course, can cause problems with the contacts, etc. You don't have that with these lithium batteries. It's much cleaner, easier solution, and as you can see, it involves a lot less batteries to replace and have that same capacity. So let's talk about levelized cost of energy. We use the term levelized cost of energy because if you want to compare batteries to batteries, you really have to ask yourself, okay, well, I'm going to spend this time installing a battery bank. If I use a lead acid or an AGM battery, I might get 2,000 cycles out of it. If I install a lithium battery, like our AmpliPHI battery or our AmpliPHI battery, I'm looking at more like 5,000 to 10,000 cycles out of it, right? How deeply can I discharge a lead acid battery, right? Typically, even deep cycle lead acid batteries, you don't get recommended to discharge them any below 50%. So you're only getting half the capacity used out of a lead acid battery or an AGM battery, whereas you're getting 100% depth of discharge, or we recommend an 80% depth of discharge. So you're getting more out of your lithium battery. You get a lot more cycles out of your lithium battery. It's easier to install. You don't have to do maintenance on that battery. And so when you add all of this up, when you add all these things together, the levelized cost of energy, what it costs per kilowatt hour of throughput from a lithium battery, typically is about half of what it actually costs to do the same thing with an AGM or a lead battery, if you look over the lifetime of the battery. And that's one of the things that we try to remind customers. They often will look at just the upfront cost of, oh, it's so much cheaper to install this battery. Yes, but you're going to get a lot less out of it, and it's going to take a lot more work to keep it going. So if you put all those things in, the capacity, the number of cycles, the efficiency of the battery, the depth of discharge, you divide the price by that, and you add all those ancillary hidden costs up, such as potentially the need for venting equipment, the need for equipment to check on the electrolytes and maintenance, etc. It is much cheaper to go with the lithium. If you have questions about that, we have a calculator on our website, and you can access it through this link. You'll all be getting a copy of these slides after this training, so I'll be emailing the slides out to everyone. Battery sizing. Let's talk a little bit about battery sizing. The capacity of batteries is typically referred to as the energy capacity. It used to be that almost all batteries were just 12 volts, and we based everything off of 12 volts, so we referred to the batteries capacity by using the term current capacity, the number of amp hours you get out of a battery. If everything is 12 volts, you can compare battery to battery by comparing the number of amp hours. But more recently, 24 and now 48 volt batteries have become the standard, right? And so that voltage of the batteries has migrated upward. And so for mobile solutions, you still have plenty of 12 volt solutions, but now to specify the amount of energy you can get out of a battery, we typically specify that in the kilowatt hours, power times time, how much power for how many hours. So a 3.8 kilowatt hour battery could provide 1,000 watts for 3.8 hours, right? And this is typically specified at a certain rate, a discharge rate. With our batteries, the discharge rate is C/5 for this specification, and the maximum rate that our batteries can discharge is C/2. That means they could deliver all of that 3.8 kilowatt hours in 2 hours. If you discharge more rapidly than that, you can actually damage the batteries. So we have a C/2 discharge rate, which means you can charge up or discharge your battery in 2 hours. Nominal voltage of the battery, that's the voltage that the battery has when it's at a state of charge of 50%. In our case, that's 51.2 for LFP cells. That's fairly universal for LFP cells. It's different for different types of lithium-ion batteries. Sometimes the word nominal voltage is used slightly differently. Nominal means named voltage, right? And so named could be, well, we're calling these 48 volt batteries. And so pay attention to that. C rate is the rate at which a battery can charge or discharge safely continuously. So a 20 amp hour battery can deliver 10 amps of charge if it's rated at C/2. And so if you have 20 amp hours worth of charge that's stored up in a charged battery, if it's delivering that at 10 amps, right, it would take 2 hours to deliver that. So it's a C/2 discharge rate. So that's what the C rate means. Our batteries are rated at a fairly fast discharge rate. They can charge and discharge in 2 hours. Most competitors that use prismatic cells have a little bit longer. There's a little bit more heat buildup in prismatic cells, and so they're typically rated at C/3. So do pay attention to that C rate when you're installing a system. The other thing to keep in mind is that C rate also dictates how much power can come out of your batteries. So if you can discharge a 3.8 kilowatt hour battery in 2 hours, you're getting 1.9 kilowatts of power out of that battery. It's the maximum continuous rate that battery can provide that power. The optimal depth of discharge on simplified batteries can really influence cycle life. And so if we discharge our batteries only down to about 80%, we're expecting 10,000 cycles out of those batteries, with after 10,000 cycles still expecting a capacity about 80% of the initial capacity. If we discharge down to 90%, we're expecting that to cut in half, only 5,000 cycles. Still, if you cycle once daily, you're still looking at 13.5 years. But the depth of discharge certainly influences the lifetime of the battery. And at 100% depth of discharge, you're looking at about 3,500 cycles. So if you drain your battery to zero again and again and again, you can do that about 3,500 times before that battery will ultimately stop working. So it's important to keep that in mind, and that's why we recommend an 80% depth of discharge. It's also important to pay attention to battery sizing. We want to make sure that the battery bank is big enough to provide the energy fast enough for the equipment that's going to be used. There are different operational modes. There's battery backup modes. Really, you're sizing to meet the critical loads. So if I have a battery system installed at my house simply for the chance that the electricity is going to go off, I'm going to want to size my battery bank to support. I'm going to want to discharge it more deeply, and I'm going to want to size it to support those loads. Off-grid settings, you're slightly going to oversize the battery bank so that we can, because we know we're going to be cycling these batteries every day and we're going to be depending on them. Peak demand, we're going to size these batteries to provide that power that's needed to offset these peaks. So if we need an extra 20 kilowatts of power, right, then we're going to need to install a 40 kilowatt hour battery bank at C/2 so we can add that 20 kilowatts of power. And then zero energy homes are sized to meet the daily loads. In other words, so we want to store as much energy as needed. So we're going to have to supplement, have an oversized PV array to store that extra energy so that we have plenty to use overnight. Here's an example on battery sizing. Daniel, what do we have there for an inverter?
So we have a Radiant 8,000 watt inverter, and we have some Outback charge controllers there.
So 8,000 watts, we need to be able to have a battery bank that's able to deliver 8,000 watts. And we've got the 3.8 kilowatt hour batteries. How much power can we pull continuously out of a 3.8 kilowatt hour battery?
1.9 kilowatts.
So would 4 batteries be enough to run that Radiant?
It would be a little undersized. So
a little undersized.
8,000 divided by 1,900.
Right. So we would recommend a minimum of 5 batteries, right? And they have well in excess of 5 batteries there. It looks like they have 14, I think, if I counted properly. And so this system is well sized. The more oversized your battery bank, kind of the lower amount of load you're putting on each individual battery, and the more likely you are to get a longer life out of those batteries. So this is a nicely sized system with a decent amount of backup power there. I suspect that this is off grid or designed to give plenty of backup power needed. So if you need help sizing, feel free to call us, of course, and you can reach our sales application engineers by pressing number 2, extension number 2, our tech support by pressing number 1, and then you can also reach out to us by email. But we have sizing tools online, and these links will be coming to you. So if you need help sizing a project with batteries, you can use our sizing tools on our website. What's the installation look like? Yeah, go ahead, Daniel.
Yeah, so we got some great questions as we're coming up to the top of the hour. Did you want to tackle some of them now, or do you want to? We're almost done here. What are you thinking?
Yeah, let's go ahead and answer some of these questions.
Great. One of them, as we're getting through here, back to in terms of battery wire length to the combiner, is it best practice to size the lengths based on the farthest battery from the combiner? So essentially, if we want to speak to that a little bit.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great question. And the answer is yes, right? So you don't want to make your cables any longer than you have to, right? But if you make your cables too short, right, then some of the batteries with a shorter cable will be doing more of the work.
And I've heard, Nathan, that we can adjust the gauge of the cable. Is that something that you'd want to work closely with us so that you could adjust the gauge?
Certainly, like a larger gauge cable is more expensive, right? But it does provide lower, what we call resistivity, and ultimately, you know, the resistance of the cable is proportional to the length of the cable. So the thicker the cable, the lower the resistivity, and so for the same length cable, you would have less resistance. You have to size your cables based on the amperage that will come out of them, right? Yep. So you should have a minimum sized cable, and yes. So the answer to the question is yes. Best practice is to do that. You can use heavier gauge cables, but the easiest way to make sure your batteries are balanced is to use good torque settings on your batteries. Follow our torque guidelines so that you're not having contact resistance at the terminals. Both at the connection on the battery and on the connection on the combiner, and then battery cables of equal length.
If left neglected at 0% for months, at what time does a battery go into an unrecoverable state, if at all?
That's a great question, and I think I don't know the answer to it. Daniel, do you want to speak on that?
No, we'll reach out to engineering. I do know that there are battery management systems there that do protect the battery to some extent.
Yeah, so some of our batteries will only be recoverable in our labs if that happens. Our battery management system, if batteries are left down to all the way down to 46 volts, batteries will go into a protection mode for the communicating batteries, and then we have a revival procedure we can share with you. For the 5 batteries, I simply don't know the answer to that if it's left at 0 volts for months. One of the things that you can often do with batteries is try to charge them for a given amount of time, and if they don't revive, certainly reach out and contact us, but I don't know the exact answer. Installation of the batteries, you want to, when you receive the batteries, you want to inspect them, make sure that box wasn't abused by the shipper. And then for mounting, we do offer these wall brackets that help as well to mount them if you're doing a wall mount. People often will choose to use one of our battery cabinets just because it comes pre-wired, etc. Daniel, do you want to bring up another question?
Yeah, a couple more. It is, and I had to look this up. Is there a pure Kurt effect with the lithium iron phosphate? I guess this is the pure Kurtz. I don't know if I'm pronouncing this right.
I thought it was Kurt.
Yeah, and I'll read it. As the rate of discharge increases, the battery's available capacity decreases.
So yeah, the answer is yes. So I had a student last year at the university spend some time writing about the Poickert effect with the batteries. And so that effect is, so basically the internal resistance of a battery it depends a little bit on the number of ions that are migrating, and the answer is yes. That's why we specify that the capacity of the battery is based on a C/5 discharge rate. Lithium batteries are much more efficient at discharging their energy than lead acid. And old lead acid deep cycle batteries were almost always rated at a C/20 discharge for their capacity. So the slower you charge a battery, the more energy you can get out of it. Ours are based on a 5-hour discharge rate. So if you do a 5-hour discharge rate on one of our batteries, you should be able to see that you'll get at least that 3.8 kilowatt hours. So that effect is there. There's also a temperature-based effect. The colder the battery, the less energy you get out of it. It starts to stabilize around 30 degrees Celsius. There's not a big difference between 30 degrees Celsius internal battery temperature and 40. But at low temperatures, remember how I talked about the viscosity of the electrolyte? At very low temperatures, a large fraction of energy is lost due to internal resistance. So that's a great question. It's a little bit in the weeds, but yes, there is that effect with lithium batteries, although not nearly as pronounced as with lead acid batteries.
The last couple questions we'll hold off till we get through the end here. Thanks for everyone sticking with us.
Yeah, I appreciate that, everyone. I'm actually going to have to jump down to the end. I do want to point out that using the appropriate torque specifications is very important. Please don't use an impact driver to drive down. I mean, we've got 3/8 inch lugs on our batteries, and they're stainless lugs, and you'll be surprised how many times we have somebody that shears that off because the installer or the installer's employees sometimes might not be very careful on how much torque they're putting on that battery. 160 inch-pounds of torque is the appropriate torque. Use a torque wrench. If you can, use an insulated torque wrench so you don't hurt yourself. Although make sure to always switch off the breaker on our battery and you won't really have problems. So I need to jump to the end. I do want to point out we have all of these products ranging from low voltage applications, complete systems. We call this our access cabinet in the top left. We have battery cabinets that come with all the batteries kind of pre-wired and mounted. The access cabinet comes with the inverter already configured for you. We also have high voltage solutions. We have a whole range of batteries that I'm not going to get into, but we have this energy track storage system, which is completely vertically integrated as well, offering you the ability add generators, etc., to your home backup system. So this is a solution that we're going to talk about next week in the training, so I'm not going to run through it. Our high voltage solutions are for big projects, commercial, industrial types of projects, and we'll have trainings coming up on that as well. So if that's something you're interested, please reach out to our sales applications engineers. One last thing, I know I'm 1 minute over already, is a couple minutes over already, is that we have this elite installer qualification program. So if you are an installer and you do install our batteries, we'd like to get you on our maps. And we would like to talk to you about joining this program. We send you a check for $25 per battery that you install, as well as we send you a swag pack, some promotional items when you register with us. We'll get you on our website and clients will be able to see you that way. But thank you, everyone. I appreciate you staying to the end. If you are here for those NABCEP credits, please send an email to the email address that's on the screen. If you have a question for Daniel and I that doesn't get answered in this follow-up period right now, please also feel free to reach out to training@simplifypower.com. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Daniel. Do you want to read off some of those questions?
Yeah. Thank you, Nathan. We got a couple of good ones, and if people need to jump, go ahead and jump. But what what do you think of the future of solid state batteries? And I think in that Will Prouse video, I think he thought that one of those batteries was solid state, and it turns out it wasn't. So what are the future of solid state batteries, in your opinion?
I guess if you're asking personally, I think that we're 5 years out from good solid state solutions. And the idea with a solid state battery is you don't have a liquid electrolyte. It will rapidly increase the safety of the battery, and it will allow much more rapid charge and discharge rates. But the reason you're not seeing them in the market right now is they're not ready. And so they're typically, when something happens in the lab, it takes 10 plus years. I think the lithium battery was discovered around 2000, 2003. Was it University of Texas, Daniel?
I'm not sure.
Look at how long it's taken, right, for that lithium battery, the LFP battery, sorry, to kind of rise up in commonality and come to the market. So I think there's a bright future for solid state batteries. I can tell you Briggs & Stratton will be there when they are ready. But right now we don't have any products that are ready for market that are solid state. And I don't think that price for solid state batteries is going to reach the general public for some years to come. But I do think the future is bright. That's a great question.
One last question is, as the production of lithium iron phosphate cells continues to ramp up, probably motivated by the EV sector, do you see the cost of our batteries decreasing in 2024? And how does that look? How does the future look for our pricing?
Yeah, that's a great question. If you haven't been paying attention, AmpliPHI has been reducing costs on some of our batteries. And I do think that, yes, as mass production gets better and better and more competition is out there, we will see batteries coming down in price. Both Rivian and Tesla are now providing the majority of their car solutions in LFP battery chemistry. And so, yes, I think, but I'm not an economist. I can't really speak to the fact that the batteries will come down. I'm just speaking from experience as a consumer that it does seem when there's more competition and more efficiency with scaled solutions that prices will come down with time.
That's the last question. Thank you so much, Nathan. And thank you everyone else for joining us today.
Thank you, everybody. I really appreciate you staying. Please reach out, training at AmpliPHI Power, if you have questions. Thanks so much. Enjoy your day.